Most people think billionaires are created by flashy ideas, viral startups, or sudden breakthroughs. But the truth is far less visible and far more predictable, because the majority of billionaire fortunes are built quietly through businesses that almost no one talks about, industries that rarely trend online, and systems that compound slowly while the public looks elsewhere. And if you understand how these businesses actually work, you start to realize that wealth isn't loud by default. It's quiet by design. If you're tired of surface-level money advice and want to understand how real wealth is built behind the scenes, subscribe now. This channel doesn't chase hype. We break down the businesses, behaviors, and decisions that quietly create billionaires while everyone else is distracted. The most common mistake people make when trying to understand how billionaires are created is assuming that wealth begins with innovation or genius, when in reality it almost always begins with infrastructure. Because before money can scale, systems must exist that allow value to move efficiently, predictably, and repeatedly. And the businesses that quietly create billionaires tend to sit underneath entire economies rather than on top of consumer trends, operating in spaces where demand is stable, margins are protected, and competition is limited by complexity rather than creativity. These businesses are rarely exciting to talk about because they lack glamour, but they dominate because they solve boring problems at massive scale. And boring problems are the most profitable ones, since everyone needs them regardless of economic cycles, cultural shifts, or personal taste. When you examine long-standing billionaire families and self-made magnates alike, a pattern emerges where early wealth is generated not from products people desire, but from systems people depend on, such as logistics, manufacturing inputs, waste management, industrial services, utilities, insurance infrastructure, and financial plumbing, industries that form the backbone of modern life while remaining largely invisible to the public. This invisibility is not accidental, because the less attention a business attracts, the more freedom it has to operate without scrutiny, disruption, or constant reinvention, allowing founders and owners to focus on optimization rather than validation, which is where real wealth is quietly built. One defining characteristic of these businesses is their position in the value chain, because they tend to sit upstream, supplying essential components, services, or processes that other businesses cannot function without. And when a company controls an upstream position, it benefits from pricing power, long-term contracts, and recurring demand, making revenue more predictable and less sensitive to trends. This is why billionaires are more likely to emerge from companies that manufacture industrial chemicals, own shipping fleets, operate data centers, or manage payment rails than from brands chasing consumer attention. Because upstream businesses rarely need to convince customers to buy, they simply need to remain reliable. Reliability, at scale, becomes leverage, and leverage is what transforms high income into generational wealth. These businesses also benefit from regulatory complexity, which discourages casual competition, because entering these industries requires capital, expertise, compliance, knowledge, and long time, creating natural barriers that protect incumbents while quietly concentrating power and profit. Another overlooked factor is how these businesses compound, because they grow not through explosive spikes, but through steady accumulation, where each year builds on the last without resetting the game, while consumer-facing companies often depend on marketing cycles, cultural relevance, and constant innovation to stay visible. Infrastructure-driven businesses focus on incremental efficiency gains, contract expansion, and geographic scaling, which may appear slow from the outside but become unstoppable over decades. This is why many billionaire fortunes seem to appear suddenly to the public, even though they were decades in the making, because the compounding happened quietly, beneath the surface, until scale made it undeniable. Wealth, in this context, behaves less like a lottery win and more like pressure building over time, invisible, until it reshapes the environment around it. Ownership structure also plays a critical role, because the businesses that create billionaires are often privately held for long periods, allowing founders to reinvest profits without external pressure to prioritize short-term performance. Private ownership enables patience, and patience enables compounding, which public markets often disrupt through quarterly expectations and volatility. By retaining control, These founders can make decisions that optimize for decades rather than headlines, choosing stability over speed and durability over visibility, which aligns perfectly with businesses that thrive on long-term contracts and essential services. This is why many billionaires are unknown outside of industry circles, despite controlling companies that touch millions of lives daily, because anonymity protects focus and focus protects margins. Geography also matters, as these businesses often operate away from cultural centers, embedded in industrial zones, ports, logistics corridors, or specialized regions where proximity to infrastructure matters more than proximity to attention. Being physically distant from hype-driven ecosystems allows these companies to attract talent focused on execution rather than exposure, further reinforcing their advantage. This geographic invisibility mirrors their operational philosophy, where success is measured in uptime, efficiency, and reliability rather than brand recognition. Over time, this creates a culture where systems outperform, making wealth creation repeatable rather than dependent on individual charisma. Perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of these businesses is how they treat risk. Because instead of chasing high-risk, high-reward opportunities, they minimize downside through diversification across clients, contracts, and regions, ensuring that no single failure can threaten the entire system. This conservative approach may seem unambitious, but it is precisely what allows wealth to survive long enough to compound, because avoiding catastrophic loss is more important than maximizing short-term gain. Billionaires understand that wealth is not built by taking extreme risks repeatedly, but by surviving long enough for probability to work in their favor, and infrastructure businesses are uniquely suited to this strategy because their demand persists even during downturns. Over time, control over these quiet systems translates into influence, as other businesses, governments, and institutions become dependent on their continued operation, granting owners negotiating power that extends far beyond revenue. This influence further stabilizes the business, creating feedback loops where power reinforces profit and profit reinforces power, all while remaining largely unnoticed by the public. By the time attention arrives, the foundation is already unshakable, and the billionaire status appears inevitable rather than accidental. This is why studying these businesses requires shifting focus away from stories of disruption and toward patterns of continuity. Because real wealth is less about changing the world overnight and more about positioning oneself where the world cannot function without you. In the end, the businesses that quietly create billionaires succeed not because they are secret, but because they are ignored, operating in plain sight while attention flows elsewhere, and this neglect becomes their greatest advantage, allowing them to grow, compound, and consolidate power without interference, proving that the path to extreme wealth is rarely loud, rarely fast, and almost never obvious to those looking in the wrong direction. What truly separates businesses that create millionaires from those that quietly create billionaires is not innovation, speed, or even ambition, but scale that is both invisible and structural. Because extreme wealth does not come from being noticed by millions of people. It comes from being relied upon by systems that move millions of dollars every single day without interruption. These businesses do not sell dreams, lifestyles, or identity. They sell continuity. And continuity is the most valuable commodity in advanced economies, because everything else depends on it functioning smoothly. When you study the origins of modern billionaire wealth, a clear pattern emerges where fortunes are built by owning choke points rather than controlling processes rather than products, and embedding into economic flows rather than chasing attention. Because once a business becomes essential to how value moves, it no longer needs persuasion, only maintenance. Many of these businesses operate in sectors that appear mature or even boring from the outside, such as industrial logistics, energy distribution, raw materials, waste processing, payments infrastructure, and enterprise software systems that companies cannot operate without. Yet these sectors generate enormous and consistent cash flows precisely because they lack glamour. Demand does not spike or crash dramatically because the services they provide are not discretionary. And this stability allows owners to plan decades ahead, reinvesting profits strategically rather than Over time, this creates compounding effects that are difficult to reverse or disrupt, because competitors face not only capital barriers, but trust barriers, as clients prefer reliability over experimentation when failure carries systemic consequences. Scale in these businesses rarely looks impressive in the early years, because growth happens through accumulation rather than explosion, where contracts are added incrementally, facilities are expanded methodically, and efficiency improves gradually. But this slow expansion hides a powerful advantage because it allows systems to mature without attracting scrutiny, while consumer brands often hit ceilings due to saturation, competition, or cultural shifts. Infrastructure-driven businesses scale horizontally and vertically, expanding into adjacent markets, acquiring competitors quietly, and integrating upstream or downstream to capture more value without changing their external profile. This silent expansion creates a form of dominance that is difficult to measure until it becomes unavoidable. Another defining feature is how these businesses monetize time, because they are designed to extract value not from single transactions, but from long-term relationships, subscriptions, usage fees, or contractual obligations that renew automatically. Time becomes an ally rather than an enemy, and each passing year strengthens the business instead of threatening its relevance. This time-based monetization is critical to billionaire creation because it aligns perfectly with compound, allowing modest margins applied consistently over massive volumes to generate extraordinary outcomes. While outsiders often underestimate these margins, they fail to account for duration, because a business that earns slightly less per transaction but operates continuously for decades will outperform flashier models that peak quickly and decline. Ownership concentration also accelerates wealth creation because many of these businesses remain closely held or controlled by a small group for long periods, allowing profits to flow upward without dilution. Unlike startups that prioritize rapid scaling through external funding, these businesses often grow organically or through debt financing, preserving equity while expanding capacity. This approach requires patience and discipline, but it ensures that when scale is finally achieved, the rewards are not dispersed across thousands of shareholders, but concentrated in the hands of those who maintain control. Over time, this concentration becomes exponential, as retained earnings are reinvested into acquiring additional assets, creating self-reinforcing growth loops that outsiders rarely see until the owner's net worth crosses public thresholds. Geographic positioning further strengthens this effect, because these businesses tend to operate where infrastructure intersects with necessity, such as ports, rail hubs, industrial corridors, data centers, and regulatory bottlenecks, locations that cannot be easily replicated or relocated. Control over physical or digital geography creates defensibility that marketing cannot match, because competitors cannot simply copy placement or access. Once established, these positions generate rents that persist regardless of economic cycles, making them ideal vehicles for wealth preservation as well as creation. Risk management plays a subtle but crucial role, because these businesses are designed to survive rather than dominate headlines, prioritizing redundancy, diversity, and predictability over maximum growth. This conservative orientation may seem unambitious to observers, but it reflects a deeper understanding that wealth is fragile and must be protected from volatility by spreading exposure across clients, regions, and revenue streams. These companies reduce the impact of individual failures, ensuring continuity even during downturns. Survival at scale becomes a competitive advantage, as weaker players exit while resilient systems absorb market share quietly. The cultural environment within these businesses also contributes to their success, as they tend to attract operators rather than visionaries, people who optimize processes, reduce waste, and improve reliability incrementally rather than chasing radical reinvention. This operational excellence compounds just as effectively as financial capital, creating organizations that become more efficient, more trusted, and more embedded over time. As these systems mature, they become increasingly difficult to replace, not because alternatives do not exist, but because switching costs rise as integration deepens. Eventually, ownership of these quiet systems translates into influence that extends beyond the business itself, as governments, corporations, and institutions become dependent on their continued operation. This dependence grants owners leverage in negotiations, regulatory discussions, and market dynamics, reinforcing their position without requiring public visibility. Power accumulates quietly, alongside wealth, creating a feedback loop where influence protects profit and profit enhances influence, all while remaining largely invisible to the public narrative of success. By the time these businesses are recognized as wealth generators, the opportunity to replicate them has often passed, because the conditions that allowed their formation no longer exist, leaving observers to marvel at outcomes without understanding the process. This misunderstanding fuels the myth that billionaire wealth appears suddenly or magically, when in reality, it is the predictable result of owning systems that scale quietly, endure relentlessly, and compound patiently over time, proving that the most powerful businesses are not those everyone talks about, but those everyone unknowingly depends on. As these quiet businesses scale and stabilize, something more powerful than revenue begins to emerge, because sustained control over essential systems transforms financial success into long-term influence, and this is where billionaire creation shifts from wealth accumulation to wealth permanence. At this stage, money itself becomes secondary to positioning, because the real advantage lies in owning assets that other powerful entities must continuously engage with, rely upon, or negotiate around. These businesses no longer compete in open markets the way consumer brands do, but instead operate within ecosystems where access, reliability, and trust dictate outcomes, allowing owners to shape conditions rather than react to them. This transition marks the point where wealth stops being fragile and starts becoming structural, embedded into the functioning of economies rather than dependent on favorable conditions. One reason these businesses create enduring power is that they sit at intersections where multiple industries overlap, such as logistics networks connecting manufacturers and retailers, data infrastructure supporting finance, healthcare, and government operations, or industrial suppliers serving energy, construction, and transportation simultaneously. By positioning at these crossroads, owners benefit from diversification without dilution, as revenue streams remain distinct while dependence converges. This structural centrality allows them to weather sector-specific downturns while maintaining relevance across cycles, reinforcing stability and compounding influence quietly over time. Unlike trend-driven companies that must continuously adapt their identity, these businesses evolve incrementally, strengthening integration rather than reinventing themselves. Control over essential systems also alters negotiation dynamics, because clients, partners, and regulators approach these businesses differently than they would a typical vendor. When failure or disruption carries widespread consequences, continuity becomes the priority, shifting leverage toward the system owner. This leverage rarely manifests as overt dominance, but instead as subtle preference, regulatory accommodation, and long-term contractual relationships that lock in advantage without public conflict. Over time, this creates an environment where competition diminishes not through aggression but through inevitability, as alternatives appear riskier simply because they are unproven. The result is market power that attracts little attention precisely because it feels stable rather than threatening. Another factor that accelerates billionaire creation at this stage is capital recycling, where profits generated by mature systems are redeployed into acquiring complementary assets, expanding geographic reach, or consolidating fragmented markets. Because these owners understand the mechanics of scale and risk, they can identify undervalued or inefficient operators and integrate them quietly, increasing efficiency while eliminating competition. This consolidation often occurs below public radar, through private transactions and industry relationships, further reinforcing concentration without provoking backlash. Over decades, this process transforms individual businesses into networks of interdependent assets, each reinforcing the other's resilience and profitability. Governance also evolves as wealth matures, shifting from founder-driven decision-making to institutionalized structures designed to outlast individuals. Family offices, trusts, and holding companies emerge not as symbols of excess, but but as tools for coordination, risk management, and continuity. These structures allow capital to be allocated strategically across generations, preserving control while adapting to changing conditions. Unlike public corporations, driven by quarterly performance, these entities prioritize longevity, enabling investments that may take years to mature but deliver outsized stability. This long-term orientation further distances billionaire wealth from public visibility, as success is measured internally rather than through external recognition. Culturally, this phase of wealth creation fosters a mindset where discretion becomes a competitive advantage because visibility invites scrutiny, and scrutiny invites intervention. By remaining understated, these businesses avoid becoming symbols of inequality or targets of public frustration, allowing them to operate with fewer disruptions. This intentional low profile is not about secrecy, but about efficiency, reducing noise that distracts from execution. Over time, discretion becomes embedded in organizational culture, shaping communication, branding, and leadership behavior in ways that reinforce stability rather than provoke attention. Intergenerational transmission of this mindset ensures that wealth does not dissipate, as successors are trained to prioritize stewardship over consumption. They learn that their role is not to expand visibility, but to preserve systems, maintaining relevance through reliability rather than This contrasts sharply with the public narrative of wealth as personal expression, highlighting why many billionaire families remain unknown despite controlling assets of enormous scale. Their influence is felt through infrastructure rather than identity, making it durable and difficult to challenge. At a broader level, these quiet businesses influence economic landscapes by shaping standards, practices, and expectations within their industries. Because they operate at scale, their operational choices ripple outward, affecting suppliers, clients, and competitors alike. This influence further entrenches their position as ecosystems adapt around them, increasing switching costs and reinforcing dependence. Over time, this creates self-sustaining environments where the business's continued existence becomes assumed, reducing perceived risk and further solidifying its role as a foundational element of economic activity. What makes this phase particularly powerful is that it does not require constant innovation to sustain dominance, only disciplined execution and incremental improvement. While innovation can enhance efficiency, the core advantage lies in consistency, reliability, and trust built over decades. This stability allows wealth to compound quietly, protected from volatility and insulated from sudden disruption. As a result, billionaire status emerges not from dramatic breakthroughs, but from the cumulative effect of thousands of small, disciplined decisions aligned toward long-term control. From the outside, this form of wealth creation appears unremarkable, lacking the drama of startups or the glamour of consumer brands. But its impact is far greater, reshaping markets and concentrating power in ways that are difficult to reverse. Those who study these patterns recognize that the real barrier to entry is not capital alone, but time, patience, and the willingness to operate without recognition. By the time attention arrives, the system is already entrenched, and the wealth it generates feels inevitable rather than extraordinary. Ultimately, the businesses that quietly create billionaires do so by transforming scale into control, control into influence, and influence into permanence, creating fortunes that persist not because they are visible, but because they are essential. This is the final stage of quiet wealth creation, where money becomes a byproduct of systems that outlast trends, personalities, and even generations, proving that the most powerful forms of success are rarely announced, rarely admired, and rarely understood until they have already reshaped the world around them. By the time a quiet business reaches full maturity, its owner is rarely thinking about becoming richer, because wealth is no longer the central objective. At these stages, the focus shifts toward preservation, insulation, and continuity, ensuring that what has been built cannot be easily disrupted, replaced, or challenged. This is where billionaire status becomes a byproduct rather than a goal, emerging naturally from systems designed to endure rather than impress. The true achievement is not financial excess, but structural permanence, where value is embedded so deeply into economic life that its removal would create friction, inefficiency, or instability across multiple sectors. What separates these businesses from visible empires is not scale alone, but their relationship to necessity. They operate in domains where demand is steady, predictable, and often invisible to consumers. Waste management, industrial maintenance, infrastructure services, specialized manufacturing, compliance software, logistics coordination, and financial clearing systems all share this characteristic. People rarely think about them, yet society cannot function without them. This invisibility creates protection because public attention tends to follow novelty and spectacle, leaving foundational systems free to grow undisturbed. Over time, this absence of attention becomes an advantage more powerful than marketing or branding could ever provide. As these enterprises expand, they accumulate not only assets but trust, which is far more difficult to replicate. Clients come to depend on consistency rather than innovation, valuing reliability above all else. Once trust is established at scale, switching becomes risky, expensive, and operationally disruptive. This dynamic transforms competition into friction, allowing incumbents to maintain dominance without aggressive tactics. The result is a market environment where growth continues quietly, margins remain healthy, and the owner's wealth compounds steadily, insulated from volatility and short-term trends. Another defining feature of these businesses is their resistance to disruption narratives. While technology reshapes many industries, essential systems evolve more slowly, integrating innovation selectively rather than being overturned entirely. This measured adoption protects incumbents while allowing efficiency gains to flow upward to owners. Unlike startups chasing exponential growth, these businesses prioritize stability, ensuring that changes enhance rather than destabilize operations. This cautious evolution further reinforces their role as pillars rather than experiments, solidifying their place in the economic landscape. The wealth generated by such enterprises often appears modest when viewed through annual income alone, but its true power lies in predictability and duration. Decades of consistent cash flow, reinvested wisely, create fortunes that rival or exceed those built through more dramatic means. This compounding effect is subtle yet relentless, driven by patience rather than acceleration. Over a lifetime, and especially across generations, this approach produces outcomes that feel disproportionate to the effort involved, reinforcing the misconception that billionaires must always emerge from innovation or risk-taking alone. Ownership structure plays a crucial role in preserving this advantage. Private control allows decisions to be made without external pressure, enabling long-term planning that public markets rarely reward. Family-owned or closely held businesses can prioritize resilience over optics, choosing strategies that minimize risk even if they sacrifice short-term gains. This freedom ensures that wealth remains aligned with the original vision of stability, rather than being diluted by competing interests or speculative incentives. As wealth solidifies, attention shifts towards safeguarding it from erosion rather than expanding it aggressively. Legal structures, governance frameworks, and succession planning become central concerns, not as displays of power, but as tools for continuity. Trusts, holding companies, and family offices are established to manage complexity, ensuring that capital remains productive without becoming vulnerable. This infrastructure of protection is rarely discussed publicly, yet it is one of the most critical factors in sustaining billionaire wealth over generations. The cultural mindset surrounding these fortunes also evolves. Display becomes unnecessary, and restraint signals confidence rather than limitation. Spending choices prioritize privacy, security, and longevity rather than visibility. This behavioral shift further distances these individuals from popular perceptions of wealth, reinforcing the idea that true financial power does not seek validation. Instead, it expresses itself through control, optionality, and freedom from external pressure. At a societal level, the impact of these quiet businesses is profound. They shape supply chains, stabilize markets, and provide continuity during periods of uncertainty. During economic downturns, their essential nature protects them from collapse. While competitors relying on discretionary spending struggle, this resilience not only preserves wealth, but often increases it. As distressed assets become available for acquisition, the cycle repeats, further consolidating control and reinforcing the advantages of operating in foundational sectors. The most striking aspect of this model is how rarely it is discussed or understood. Popular narratives celebrate disruption, visibility, and rapid ascent, obscuring the reality that many of the world's wealthiest individuals achieved their status through patience, discipline, and a deep understanding of necessity. These stories remain largely untold because they lack drama, yet they reveal the mechanics of enduring success more accurately than any headline-grabbing startup ever could. For those observing from the outside, this can feel counterintuitive. The absence of spectacle makes these fortunes seem smaller than they are, masking their true scale. Yet when measured over time, their impact is undeniable, shaping industries, influencing policy indirectly, and anchoring economic systems in ways that are difficult to dismantle. This is power exercised through presence rather than proclamation, stability rather than dominance. In the end, the real businesses that quietly create billionaires do so by aligning with inevitability. They attach themselves to needs that persist regardless of culture, technology, or politics, ensuring relevance through function rather than fashion. Their owners understand that the strongest position is one that does not require defense, because it is embedded too deeply to be displaced. This understanding transforms business into architecture, wealth into infrastructure, and success into something that lasts long after attention has moved elsewhere. This is why the richest outcomes often emerge from the least glamorous paths. While others chase visibility, these builders cultivate indispensability. While markets fluctuate, their systems endure, and while public narratives focus on what is new, the quiet foundations of wealth continue to grow, shaping the world without ever asking to be noticed. If this changed the way you think about wealth, subscribe to the channel. Here, we don't chase hype or highlight what's loud. We uncover how real money is built, protected, and quietly compounded over time. Turn on notifications and stay with us, because the most powerful stories in wealth aren't the ones everyone sees, they're the ones operating silently underneath everything else.